So we'll be talking about sex and relationships tonight. No, I'm just joking. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'd like to thank the committee and everybody for being here. It's laid out, great weekend. I'll be talking about step one, and for those who get offended and bent out of, nose out of joint, we have the 4-step coming tomorrow, so which is good. And then step 11 and 12, you can go work with somebody else and forget about what I said, right? So it's one of those things. I'm a recovered alcoholic, and my name's Tony. Sobriety date's April 8, 1989. It's not my first introduction to AA, but it was my first introduction to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, as weird as that may sound. My first introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous was in 1978. I was 16 and dying of alcoholism at 16. Thinking of ending my life at 15. Thinking if I had to live the rest of my life like this. I grew up in Toronto. I don't need to get into the story too much. That's not what makes me alcoholic, but I didn't know that. Came into the fellowship looking for a different way of life than the life I was living. I knew there was something here, but I just couldn't put my finger on it because I just met my dad, who was 4 years sober, and he introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous. He was phoning to make amends to my family. He just found out where we lived and all that stuff. He found out our number through my godmother, where he convinced her enough that he changed. And he found the religious experience in a sanitarium because he was locked up for a danger to himself and other people. And I don't need to get into his story, but it was sufficient enough where he had this change through the religious variety. And he tried to pass that message on to me, and it wasn't clicking. The religious variety, right? Just find this thing and you should be okay. I was always on a quest. Most of us are on a quest. When I found that drink, I was no longer on a quest. I found what I was looking for, right? And it wasn't the first drink that started my alcoholism. A lot of people think it's the first drink. It's like I'm allergic to pistachios. It wasn't the first time I ate pistachios. It was somewhere along the line I started having a different reaction to it. And that you'd have to know what alcoholism is to understand when that reaction or that this different thing that took place started. If you didn't know what alcoholism was, you'd start thinking it's a behavioral thing, right? It's the consequences, right? And our job as a Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and great events like this is to bring us back to the purpose, or to see how far offline we are, right, or off the mark we are, or to remind us the importance of this thing, because it is important, right? And one of the things one of the things, I talk with my hands. He says, hold on. So one of the things as responsible members of Alcoholics Anonymous is to carry this message, not a message, right? And yeah, tradition 3, like we like to throw that around, but that doesn't take away from our responsibility, right? Because we are responsible for what message we carry in Alcoholics Anonymous, because people's lives depend on it. Not everybody's, just the alcoholics. Well, we have one of the biggest fellowships in the world. Who wouldn't want to hang out here? Right? We're crazy people. Like, we're fun people. Like, I've had people come up in restaurants say, you got to cut that table off. They're not drinking, right? We got stories. We horrify normal people. We usually weed them out right in a group. It's like, my wife's a normie. I'll get into that in a second. We all have our problems, right? So it's kind of one of those things. But step one is boy, that's a really underutilized step in Alcoholics Anonymous. And look, where we talk about it all the time. No, you talk about your ideas what step one is. You don't talk about step one. We started already. I told you we're going to start early, right? What makes you say that? I've been to a lot of meetings, right? I hear people, even well-known speakers, actually don't really talk about step one. They entertain, they're funny, they get the catchphrases, they throw the bumper stickers out there, and so what we like about it is they're agreeing with our understanding. Okay, we'll bring them back next year. That other guy, don't bring him back so much. I don't like him. He disturbs us. Right? And that's what this weekend should be about, right? It says, whose message are you carrying? Whose ideas are you carrying? Right? And kind of like, and that's the game changer for people like me. Like, it's hard to believe that I was dying of alcoholism in AA. Right? My last relapse, I did 360 meetings in 90 days. And I was in 4 12 and 12 studies, right? And this is after coming up to 11 years of in and out. I've tried everything to get sober. Based on the stuff I was hearing my interpretation of what I was hearing in the fellowship's message, which, by the way, is we really do a disservice when we call it the program. Oh, because you're lying. It's not the program, it's the fellowship. It would go against our traditions. What makes you say that? Well, if you ever get a chance to read the chapter Working with Others, it talks about when you find your prospect, you find out all you can about them, introduce yourself when it's appropriate as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, a part of the fellowship, right? And what you're carrying is a program of recovery, and if they wish to go through with it, you'd be available to that. So one of the first responsibilities they used to do is read the book, right? And if you want to go through with it, I know it's hard to believe, but there's a lot of people in our fellowship that have a book that's never read it. No, nobody. I remember going to a couple guys. I said, "You own a big book?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Do you know where it is?" He says, "No." Right? And so how many people are new here in their first 5 years? I got 30 days. I'm not new. Right? So why I say about 5 years, because we read that tonight. It says the experiment. The book has some really good humor in it. The experiment of quitting. Because if you're one of us, you won't be able to do it. And meetings aren't the solution to alcoholism. How many people find that surprising? I found that very surprising. Because I figured after 360 meetings in 90 days, I talked like I had this thing. I know there's nobody like that here. I would hear something really good at one meeting, everybody laugh. I'd be sharing it at the next meeting like it was my idea. Right? And I'd get a couple phone numbers, and then I'd be good for a while, right? Get a job, you know the promises, relationship, job, money, prestige, power greater than yourself to help you through the night. I think I'm getting this thing. Right? And then I'd be drinking again, just baffled, right? And so you can imagine these group of people, like, I'll back up. My first meeting, I knew there was something here. Something kind of originated inside that I didn't have to live the way I was living. But going from there to the longevity of this thing, the experiencing of it, not the fabricating, not the wow of it, you know, like the excitement of it, the actual experience of it was short-lived. And I found myself drinking all the time. Like, it was really weird, and it would be suddenly, it's like I didn't want to drink, and I'd find myself drinking. If you asked me the day before, why did you start again, I would give you I don't know, right? Because I do my interpretation on what I heard this thing was about and how it works. Well, if you're new, you have no idea how it works, because you're thinking how it works while they're reading how it works. I wonder how this works, because it's like, it's chapter 5. There's a lot of information to get you to chapter 5. Like the first half of how it works, it talks about being doomed to an alcoholic death. But if you ask most people, they wouldn't get that out of that part of it. And then they talk about the experience of those that went through this. And then after they're done, they don't talk about the steps anymore. They talk about these principles. So if you started doing a survey, you'd be really surprised how much off the mark we are compared to the information as laid out by the founders that was read earlier. This is the 4th edition. They haven't changed the message of Alcoholics Anonymous in 87 years, something like that, right? Am I kind of okay on the math on that? But we've changed the message. Where are you getting your ideas from? Well, it sounds good. Well, sounds good is what kills us. Right? We hear stuff that sounds good. Just don't drink no matter what. Oh, good. If you're not an alcoholic, you'll be able to do that. If you're an alcoholic, you'll drink no matter what. You'll have a chip in your pocket. Waiter. And wondering how it happened. Any relapsers here or just me? How many people's relapsed here? Look around. Then you hear this new stuff that you're hearing in A. Relapse isn't a part of my story. Then you don't got one. Thanks for visiting. You here for the dating? What's going on? Well, I hear it's good. I'm part of SA. Right? I hear the pickings are good here. So anyways, I don't know why I go there. Pray for me. Like, it's open season, right? Like I said, 4th is tomorrow. So I'm a part of the Keystone Group. We started up when COVID happened, and we have roughly around 30 members. And it started with one person carrying this message to another. We meet Wednesday nights online. And we have a group of about 30 people. We put on 19 big book studies a week. 19. A group of 30 people. And we have 3 in-person meetings. How does that happen? Carrying this message with this book in hand. These people got lit up from the inside out. Where did that start? When you look at the history of this thing, when you go back to where it actually started with Ebby. You got to look at the miracle that was taking place there, where some people went and visit. I'll probably bastardize the hell out of this thing, but the idea is there, where they went and visit the judge to ask to suspend his sentence. They worked with him, and he had this experience. Now, what is really cool is Bill was dying of alcoholism. He's been to treatment twice. So if just don't drink no matter what was the case, then Bill would have got this the first time. The act of desperation was the first time he went to treatment. That stuff don't get alcoholics sober. It gets your attention, but it don't get you sober. We just read about that. People, family pleading with you, and you walk right into a bar. What are you thinking? So we see that we need to carry this message to people like us who are dying in the fellowship, right? And if we're carrying this message, then we should all basically sound roughly the same. There's a collective understanding here, what the problem is, what the solution is, and the course of action. Where do we get that idea from? Well, that's why we put this together. The fellowship took its name from the book. So when you hear people share, most people don't know they're sharing their understanding and not our understanding. How do you know if you're sharing our understanding or your understanding? You could show us what you're talking about. When you're taking your sponsee through this book, you're showing them the same collective information that was passed on to you. Well, what makes you say that? It's funny. You hear people like debating stuff that is, like the big, do we recover or don't recover? You guys have that debate here? Well, they cover it and how it works. Those who do not recover, those who didn't do the steps. So if you're not recovering or recovered, do the steps. Kind of weird, eh? The book starts off with our basic text. The story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. So what's the most important part of that? We would think recovered. No, it's the story. It's the story of Alcoholics Anonymous, how this came about for people like us and what they used to do with people like us and our fate and stuff like that. So when you start looking at the story has never changed. Right? But the fellowship is changing. We're moving away from it. And who's the only one that dies from this thing is the alcoholic. We have a responsibility to carry this message. Right? And so when this thing started happening is when the doctor witnessed the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous taking place. Before it became Alcoholics Anonymous. And what makes you say that? Well, first page in the doctor's opinion, he talks about this patient coming back for the 3rd time. One of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 3rd time in treatment. So just don't drink no matter what doesn't seem to fit the bill here, does it? Right? Think it through, not fitting the bill. Meeting makers make it to the next drink, right? So it talks about there's a message here, right? And so the doctor says this patient was of the type he come to regard as hopeless. He was a good businessman of good earning potential, so he acknowledged 2 things happening in his life. There was this human condition. If he didn't have this illness, he would actually be quite successful. How many people would agree with that? If you didn't have this illness, would your life look a lot different? Right? All that pain and suffering and all those bewilderments and all that stuff wouldn't have taken place. So why do we keep doing what we're doing? So the doctor talks about, and they start selling this as a soft touch, right? Into the idea of step 1, because if they would have told you right in the doctor's opinion, you suffer from a subtle form of insanity that places you beyond human aid, how many people would stop reading? It's like we're trying to save your life. Can you participate? Right? It's kind of like, they soft sell this, right? Because then Someone else, I told you you're insane. Even a doctor talks. Nobody would get past the doctor's opinion. But he talks about there, the message has to have depth and weight, right? And he talks about there's two types of people. Those with his methods seem to work, and those whose his methods were outside his scope. And he come to regard these types as hopeless. What type? Our type. We read that. So how should we determine to our alcoholic readers whether they are one of us? There's certain things that make us beyond human aid, which is outlined in step 1, right? And so they talk about he witnessed that Ebby passed on a message to him, but he didn't know that he acquired certain ideas that he put into practice. The third time in treatment, with the help of his friend. He went through this course of action, and that was the start of Alcoholics Anonymous. He realized in order to save himself, he had to carry this message. You'll hear that all this weekend, of the beauty of this thing and the experience of this thing. And the basis is the same as the thousands that they talked about here. The story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered is the same collective experience. When we read the spiritual appendix in the back of the book, it talks about the same collective experience. When they talk about God as we understand him, we understand what they're talking about when they say that. We get back to the basics. The book talks about further on, the description of as we understand it. It's the collective understanding of who? The founders. And they made it palatable, meaning all-inclusive, for those who are coming, because we're easily offended, aren't we? We don't care if we offend you, but we're easily offended, right? We're really, like, I mean, think about it. How many people have been trying to save your life long before you thought you had a problem? You wonder what their problem is. I won't be calling them again. Oh, that was my lawyer, sorry. So we really don't understand what's happening here. So if you're new and you're looking for a sponsor, the best way to find a sponsor, anybody would like to know the best way to find a sponsor? Get your big book if you have one. If you don't have one, find it, steal it, make amends when you get to step 9. It is on page 44. They talk about, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And as a summary of everything we learned in the preceding chapters, ask your potential sponsor to explain that page to you. And if they can't explain that page to you, then find a sponsor that can. Because sponsorship's based on the book. We're not counselors, right? Hardly manage our own relationships, never mind give you advice on them. Really. Because you know what? It's about sharing our experience, strength, and hope. We all have opinion and ideas, don't we? Go to any discussion meeting. How self is still fixing self. Where's God? Oh, that's tomorrow's topic. Right? How do we practice these principles in all our affairs? So getting back to the understanding of this, they talk about until such an understanding happens, little or nothing can be accomplished. Until what understanding? Is the understanding of what we're afflicted with. I'm not doing step 1. I'm concurring whether I have this or not. I'm conceding that I have this thing. What thing? The thing that they describe in here. So my sponsor, because I have a genius type mind, I don't know, probably the only one here, right? I'm 11 years in and out. I just did 360 meetings in 90 days. My birthday was April 6th. April 8th, I'm getting a 3-month chip after 11 years. I talk like I was getting an Academy Award. I like to thank me, and I like to thank me, and I like to thank me, and, you know, because all I've been doing is working on me, and my face totally showed that. You watch people who are working on themselves, their faces are all contorted. There's like, stop that, right? Like, holy stuff, stop it. So anyways, so this guy, as this started to happen, was I'm one of those then, probably sometimes now, who suffer from great emotional and mental disorders. I thought those things made me alcoholic. No, they made me a person with more problems, right? But what made me an alcoholic then was the confusing part, because I'd get into all these consequences, and my consequences were a lot more severe than some, and I didn't have the same consequences as those. And they talked about these consequences are what made them alcoholic. So my idea was, if I could just drink without consequence, probably I'm the only one here. How many people had a consequence problem when they got here? It wasn't a drinking problem. I got some problems. And the meeting's happening, you're thinking, how am I going to fix this? What am I going to say to her this time for her to come back? How am I going to get my job? How am I going to get that well? How am I going to fix what I got myself into? Anybody? So the whole meeting, you're thinking about you, and they think you're going to hear something sufficient enough. Go, oh my God, what a great idea, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Where could I get one of those and start in on this? Which I've never heard anybody ever say. How many people heard people coming back and said, you know what, I think I really need to do the steps out of the big book as laid out by the founders so I can have their same experience? No. Remember the doctor talked about fully maladjusted, mental defectives and full flight from reality. I know 2 people like that. I wasn't on the list. I was running a bit of bad luck, but I mean, like I'm cutting my own hair, vomiting green bile and unemployable, but I'm going to get it together any time now because it's still not that bad. Because I still found people willing to fix me in AA. They're now in Al-Anon, but God bless them, right? Like, so like I'm nuts. I know it's hard to believe looking at me, but like, hey, like cheese and cracker are not even on the same plate. Ask me to share. You hear the angels sing as I'm talking. Because I formulated a talk based on everything I heard. We're chameleons. Any chameleons here? And everybody in the room sounding like me. So no wonder I'm not getting this thing. So the message of Alcoholics Anonymous is totally lost where I've been. So going back into this thing, so I just relapsed an hour after that meeting getting a chip. I go back the next day, right? We smashed up the truck, on and on and on. But that night I was sitting in the old hotel. It was last call. And I had a step 1 experience. See, there's a difference between admitting you have a problem and a step 1 experience. A lot of people don't know that. The book talks about people, until you have a step 1 experience, step 2 really doesn't make sense, right? A lot of people in AA admit they have a problem, right? A problem that they could fix, a problem that they could manage, because meeting makers make it. And no matter what, just don't drink. And if you really want some good recovery, we're going to take you to page 417. I wonder why people aren't getting sober. What about the first half of the book? Oh, they're not ready for that. Don't want to overwhelm them. Okay. Then why do we read how it works? Why don't we just read page 417? Because that's not the solution to alcoholism. Never has been, never will be. Right? And the doctor talked about that, right? These people keep on relapsing over and over until what? Until an entire psychic change happens. Until that happens, they'll be doomed to an alcoholic death. And he witnessed, on the other hand, as strange as it may seem to those that don't understand, once the psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed are able to curb this desire, curb this thought. That's the way he kind of expressed it, because when he looked at Bill, went through this thing, the miracle happened. Imagine the 3rd time through treatment where he allowed Bill to work with other people in his facility. If that's not a profound alteration in the witnessing of this thing in a facility that just ended, when you kind of think about it, that the town's hospital was operating during Prohibition. Prohibition just ended. I didn't know that. My wife told me that. She's an Army. I didn't care. She said, Prohibition just ended. Funny how they had a treatment center for this thing. Right? And the methods seemed to work for a lot of people, except it didn't work for people like us. What makes us like us? Right? And that's what the book talks. In the previous chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. So, if we did a survey, it'd be quite interesting how many people think alcoholism is a 3-fold illness. Our book doesn't say it is. It doesn't say that anywhere it's a 3-fold illness. And it'll be interesting to say that everybody talks about the obsession. The obsession isn't one of the symptoms in alcoholism. That's a treatment center idea. Because I could see, feel, and touch the obsession. I could do something about that. What makes the older book says. This idea has to be smashed. What idea? That I could control and enjoy my drinking. So the obsession refers to people who haven't done step 1 yet, or might not even need to. Because the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is the idea that somehow, someday, they'll control and enjoy your drinking. So if you're still thinking you can control and enjoy your drinking, or you still want to drink, you haven't done step one. Oh, when's that 4-step meeting? No, so I don't say that. The book talks about that. And they talk about the experience of these guys until they had the step one experience, like I had in the old hotel at 1:30 last call, when I realized for the first time in my life that all my efforts, I was going to die an alcoholic death. That I was beyond human aid. That everything I'd done was only going to lead me to another drink. I had the same kind of idea that Bill was experiencing. No words can tell the loneliness and despair. I met my match. I've been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. I had the same thing. And I had the same thing. I had no solution. Same thing as Bill. He had no solution. So is to go on to the bitter end. Get sober for a while, right through circumstances. And then this thing would return. What thing? The second symptom. We all understand the allergy. How many people get thirsty here when they drink? Normal people don't, which is kind of weird. I've watched normies in their natural habitat. My wife's a normie. And it boggles my mind the way she drinks. And then I tell her how I drink, and it boggles her mind. She does stuff like, she brought up stuff like pairing. Pairing. She goes, yeah, the white wine goes with this fish, or red wine goes with this meat. I thought you meant pairing, like tequila goes with pot, and this goes with that. And like I thought you meant pairing, like what kind of night we having? Are we going to jail tonight, or are we going to have romance? Like, what kind of night we having? Anybody? Come on. Right? Yeah. Okay, I better not do tequila. We're going to a family function. Okay, we'll just we'll just keep it with beer. Anyways. And she'll do stuff that I've never seen done before. Like she'll pour out wine when she's done with it. Sacrilegious, I know. I remember opening the fridge once, and there was a glass of wine. They were married probably 6 years. There was a glass of wine with cellophane on it. I thought she was doing that to mess with me. I said, hey, she's in the living room. I said, what are you doing? She goes, what? You know what? She's like, no, I don't know what. In the fridge. What in the fridge? The wine. She says, oh, yeah, I had enough. Yeah, I wanted to save it for dinner tonight. Which I've never done. Anybody? I had her in the kitchen. This is what I mean. We're different. Just the way we talk and think. She's in the kitchen one day going, honey, you know a lot about alcohol. And I was proud. Yeah. You know how we get when someone goes to ask a question? Yeah. She goes, does wine go bad? There was a long pause. And I said, I don't know. Right? And I said, and even if it does, is a bit vinegary? I said, you should be all right after a second glass. She goes, what's the matter with you? Right? And so, like, the promises come true with these people. I remember one time, she was just, can you help me? I said, sure. I go in the kitchen. She goes, can you help me put the cork back in the bottle? I said, you open a bottle, you finish a bottle. Right? Like, is that different? How many people understand that? Right? So, but when we talk, we're like, people go like, what the hell, you did what? And then you drank again after that? Yeah. Yeah. And you drank what? Right? Right. So why the allergy, the compulsion to keep on drinking after we have a drink. And so people, when they look at the allergy part, when they started to explain that symptom, they went on to start using certain terminology, like this allergy, which is the first symptom in alcoholism. I was an alcoholic before I drank. Impossible. You may have had behavioral problems before you drink, but that doesn't make you alcoholic. There's only one thing that makes you alcoholic. How many people find that surprising? You got to drink. Oh, yeah. And then what happens is it produces the phenomenon of craving. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form whatsoever. It makes sense. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we're like other people or presently maybe has to be smashed. That I could never safely use alcohol in any form whatsoever. Why? Because it produces the phenomenon of craving. If I can't control the amounts I drink, then I can't control the outcome of the night. Damn, I'm always going to have consequences in association with my drinking. That makes sense. Just don't take the first one. Makes sense. Then it's going to be a short book, right? But there's another problem here. When they get to page 21, this is really interesting stuff. They talk about the different type of people who look like us, they sound like us, but they're not us. And what does that mean? Given good reason, they could stop. And you hear it all the time. I learned my lesson. I did this. I wanted to drink, and I haven't had a drink since. What's the matter with you? I'm different. And the book talks about how should we help our readers to determine whether they are one of us. The experiment of quitting. Why do they use the word experiment? Because if you're one of us, you won't be able to stay sober regardless of what you do on your own volition. I've been to best treatment centers in Canada twice. It was so good the first time, I remember it the second time I went. And they explained to me all this stuff, and they talked the same, they got the same story the guy in the book. When they treated me, thought relapse was unthinkable. Anybody? Why? Because he doesn't understand alcoholism. If he understands alcoholism, then he doesn't concur with the outcome. Because the step one promise is you're going to drink again. Relapse isn't a part of recovery. Damn right it is. It's the first step. Because if you could keep yourself sober, why would you need step two? I want to become a better person. There was nothing wrong with me. Right? But when you understand this stuff, and they talk about how should we help our alcoholic readers to determine whether they're one of us. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede, not leading into, precede a relapse. Oh, there's that word relapse. The book was talking about relapse 87 years ago. A relapse is an act against your own will. Anybody ever try to quit smoking here? Right? Well, it doesn't count because I didn't go to a 12-step fellowship. Well, no, it means you tried to exert your own will to do something that you no longer wanted to do, and you returned to it. You relapsed. Right? I've tried diets a lot of times. No need to comment. But I fall short all the time, so I kind of fall back on my desire to relapse. Right? And so they talk about here, I want to get sober, I want a different change. Bill talked about that. How many times? What he wouldn't give. Right? What he wouldn't give. Right? To change things, to make right. The second time in treatment, the loneliness and despair. I met my master, I've been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. He left there and he continued. Why? Because he couldn't change his story. Right? The story of Alcoholics Anonymous is about change. It's about a solution that's outlined by the first 100 men and women that create this change, and we find it in our basic text. So they talk about here the second symptom in alcoholism on page 23. They said, if I never took the first drink, I'd never set the terrible cycle in motion. We all agree with that? So therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. Makes sense, right? So the first time and they said, as we look back, so if you got people writing out their first step, which people like to do, the raise the bottom, and you're not talking about the allergy or the inability to stay sober, you're not talking about step one. Right? As we look back, we're looking back at when the allergy took place. I remember the first time I started thinking about the second beer before I was finished the first beer. I remember the first time I became more concerned with the next drink than I was the drink I was having. Anybody like that here? Right on. And then I remember when I tried to quit, 15, 16, and I kept on returning to it. Anybody here? So if I never took the first drink, I never set the terrible cycle in motion. Now they're going to introduce us to the second symptom of alcoholism, which is founded in our basic text, is the malady that centers in the mind. How many people have you heard talk about that in regards to step one? Got silent here. Hardly nobody talks about that condition that the book talks about continuously. In working with others, it says, explain this condition of the mind, this mental twist, this thing that makes us beyond human aid, this thing that they describe as beyond human power, this condition that we suffer from. Unless this psychic change or spiritual experience happens, we die an alcoholic death. So it's so important that when they were working with people, the one guy on page 40, you can look at it later, he admitted he had some of these symptoms, but it was a far cry from admitting he can do this thing himself, which is, we have a fellowship full of people like that. They're talking about their idea, how they're going to stay sober based on them. Then there's another group of people which are not liked too much. Those big book thumpers talking about big book and AA meetings. What's the world coming to? You know those big book thumpers? Oh, here comes that guy, says the non-alcoholic. Because the alcoholic who hears this message kind of goes, there's something there. Because when George was dying of alcoholism in AA, I would look at him to feel better about me. And there's these guys that went and 12-stepped him. They carried the message to him. Because most of us don't find this thing. Right? That's why the 12 steps says carry this message. So they went and got George back in probably 87 when I first went to Vancouver. I met George. So they probably got hold of him in 88. They got him into the first big book study workshop. He went through this thing, and something really remarkable happened. He had the same transformation that Bill had in the first 100 men and women. Exact same experience as the result of these steps, not a result. And a part of his rehabilitation, or whatever you want to call it, securing what he's found. But he found it was something of gratitude that compelled him to carry this to those who were dying. It was a sense of responsibility. And what he started doing was to work with me. I didn't ask him to start working with me. We give consent as soon as we show up in a meeting. We go, can I work with you? No. Go find someone else to work with. Because I don't really need help. I'm just observing. I'm just here just trying to get my stuff together. So George started working with me without knowing he was working with me. And he'd ask me stupid questions. Like in how it works. What path they talking about? I said, 90 meetings in 90 days. What's the matter with you? I didn't know what he was talking about. Right? Some of us tried to hold on to our old ideas. What ideas? What are the 3 pertinent ideas? And I'd say them, but he says, no, what's the meaning behind it? What do you mean, what's the meaning behind it? So now I see George, I'm a little nervous because I'm starting to see he knows that I don't know. Now he knows. And now I'm starting to know. So I'm uncomfortable with the fact that somebody else knows the truth about me. I thought I was under the radar. Anybody? We're okay with people as long as they don't tell us the truth about us, right? As soon as they tell us, game over, I'm not phoning you no more. We both have a silent code to keep what we see about each other silent, right? So anyhow, so George started, and then he asked me what an alcoholic was. And I got into beatings, the jails, the stabbings, the clubhouse, and all the things I was doing and all that other stuff. He says, none of that makes you an alcoholic. It makes you blink, 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 but it doesn't make you an alcoholic. No, I'm really mad at George. He's got my attention. He's disturbing me, which is one of the requirements for good sponsorship. Because if you're leaving your sponsor and going, oh, I feel so good, you got the wrong sponsor. So George is asking me, he says, oh, that sounded so good. I didn't know he was in the meeting. That sounded so good. He says, can you show me where it says that? What? He says, any of it. So none of my ideas was grounded on anything other than me. I couldn't show you what I was talking about. And the basic text is put together that we carry this message out of here so in turn they could work with somebody else. That's why they put this together. Right? And so George, he says, you've been around a long time. I said, yeah. I was almost proud of the fact, when full-flight firm reality and downright mental defectives. I was running a 12 and 12 group, by the way, sitting around talking about Bill's experience and hoping it would rub off. I didn't know that the 12 and 12 was not the steps. I didn't know that. I didn't know, without getting into too much of it, that it was Bill's experience 13 years after the fact of doing a course of action. So I'm sitting around talking about Bill's experience, hoping I could have the same experience by not doing what he did to get it. That's like acceptance. He had a certain experience that allowed him to see things like that. Until you have the same experience, you're just soother sobriety. It's making you feel good temporarily, and we got a 24-hour chip waiting for you. Because this is serious stuff. Well, what makes you see that? Well, the book talks about it, right? It says this malady and the loss of choice. So if your sponsor says they have a choice today, get a new sponsor. Because I'm 33, coming up to 34 years sober, I still don't have a choice. What I have is a daily reprieve from this sentence that I was spared from. right? I've been given this grace based on this connection with a power greater than myself that I formulated through this recipe. So George says, why don't you come and help us out? So I went to that meeting thinking I was going to go help them with an experience I had never had. I didn't know that. I went to this meeting, and for the first time in 11 years, somebody introduced me to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I always thought I was in the program because everywhere you go, welcome to the program. I'm in the program. So I thought the program is contained with the message you hear in it, and just figure out what works for you. Take what you want, leave the rest. I'm wondering why I'm dying of alcoholism, but I don't know I have alcoholism because I don't know what an alcoholic is. I have a behavioral problem, so I'm working on my behaviors. My old behaviors never became old. They just continued, right? And that was me stuck on me, and the only thing that would relieve me from me was another drink, the insanity. So they talked about this malady that precedes the first drink. And so in the book, they never give you an example of how the obsession takes over. They never use that in regards to step one. Treatment centers like that because why? If you're paying them $40,000 plus, you better give me a solution that I could figure out. Why would I be giving? This is the most expensive book you'll ever get. The first one nearly cost you everything you got. Second one's $16. You think about it. Most of us have to be pretty mangled before we say, okay, what are you talking about? But most of us have to be 12 steps. So George got me into this meeting. I went in there thinking I got this thing, and they took me through the forwards. And I thought, wow, it was pretty wild. And the statistic thing of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, not of everybody who came to AA, of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once. Some after a few relapses. So AA is really technically designed for people who can't get sober. How many people find that surprising? It's designed for relapsers. Oh my God, you're kidding. Because we've gotten to a place where we think it's designed for people who can stay sober. What do? Anybody coming back, sit them in the middle and shame them. Haven't you had enough yet? Thanks for doing more research for me. They're all ignorant statements. Because if you understood alcoholism, you understand this person's drinking beyond their capability of not to drink. You'd understand that they're actually dying of alcoholism. They're coming here looking for a solution. Why do they keep coming back? Because there's no other place for them to go. This ain't Burger King, have it your way. If you have it your way, I got another chip for you, if you're fortunate enough to get it. So as a collective, as a fellowship, we have a responsibility. Why? Because people are coming here to find a message they don't know they're looking for. You think Bill had any idea what was about to happen to him when Ebby showed up? You think he had any idea? Most of us had no idea what was about to happen to us as it happened. So George got me into this meeting, and I had no idea what was about to take place. And when he got me to page 44, I realized what made me beyond human aid and the step one promise. And it made step two more understandable about the psychic change in the course of action they outlined for me to get this connection with a power that creates this shift. And it made sense why in step 10 it talks about the problem is now removed. Because as long as I still have an alcoholic mind, I'll continue to drink. Right? So if I go through this course of action and someone has a psychic change or spiritual experience, do they still have an alcoholic mind? The answer is no. The doctor talks about that. He says, I've never seen one case as yours ever recover. You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. They use this terminology, the mind. Well, what makes one have the mind of a chronic alcoholic? What's chronic? Repeat offender. If you've relapsed more than a couple times before or in AA, welcome to the club of Beyond Human Aid. Conceding to that is the first step in recovery. Right? So the beginning of step 3 is actually page 45, is the introduction to the palette of the willingness to be willing to do the rest of this thing to get this thing. And how do I get this thing? By going through the course of action that they outlined. And my responsibility is to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. My message is to get you connected to something greater than you. And then your responsibility is to maintain that. As members, our job is to disturb people about the question of alcoholism. What makes you say that? Well, I remember going to a meeting thinking I was going to die without getting into it in Toronto. I was on a 3-day run. I was a mess. I was convinced I was going to die. I sat in the front row. I looked like a train wreck. I won't get into everything I was doing, but it would be very evident the things I was doing. Sitting in there with a T-shirt on, reeking of alcohol, reeking of vomit, right? Worried about going on a seizure. I'm thinking, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. This guy who was sponsoring me, he was an atheist hooked on Valiums, and Tradition 3 was our favorite quote. So I liked him. And so I'm sitting, he comes up to me, he looks at me, he goes, "You're going to be okay." I said, "Really?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Good, I thought I was going to die." I left the meeting. I left. Like, what kind of thinking dominates an alcoholic time after time? The desperate experimentation of the first drink, right? They talk about self-knowledge will not keep us sober, right? Self-knowledge is of absolutely no avail. Your last drunk will not keep you sober. It will motivate you through the steps, but it will not keep you sober. Thinking it through, if you're alcoholic, won't even be a thought, right? I'll give you some ideas why I was dying of alcohol. I went to this meeting. I said, "I'm really nervous about going to this party." A couple old timers, "Oh, let me give you some advice." I said, "Okay." He says, "Make sure you hang on to a drink all night. And if anybody asks you if you want to drink, just tell them there wouldn't be enough for both of you." I found the solution for alcoholism in Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to this party, probably just before the Army, when I thought I had a disciplinary problem, but that's another story. So I go to this party, I'm telling everybody, it should be on the 20 questions, right? If you need to tell everybody in that party you're not drinking. Normal people don't do that. Just FYI, right? If you've done that, welcome to the club. So there's nobody left that says, "Hey, Tony, you want to be?" "Oh, no, if I started, there wouldn't be enough for both of us." I think I found the solution to alcoholism based on self, based on a message of an old-timer in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? 11:15, it's like tattooed in my mind. 11:15 shows up, the guy shows up from afternoons. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh." He says, "What are you drinking?" I said, "Ginger ale." He says, "You want a beer?" I said, "Oh, no, if I started, there wouldn't be enough for both of us." He says, "I got 6 flats in the back." I did a calculation, and I assumed he was right. I staggered out of that place. What is that? It's the suddenly. It's the malady that takes place in the mind. The best description of this condition in step 1 that explains our condition, because remember, they're trying to explain something that doesn't make any sense in terminology that those who have it make sense to. Right? Because they're saying, well, how are we going to make sense of something that doesn't make any sense? To people who have it, it will make sense to. If that made sense, welcome, right? So what happens is they talk about this thing, is that they talk about when we describe this mental twist, this thing that people like us understand us at once. My wife don't understand it whatsoever. You're in and out 11 years. You got stabbed in the hospital. They want to do surgery. You want to go get another drink? I said, "Yeah, it was a long weekend." She goes, "You're going to stay in AA, right?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to stay in AA." So that's the mental twist. That's the guy who thought an ounce of whiskey in his milk. That's the guy, as he crossed the threshold dining room, a couple highballers. Something takes over, and they talk about that on page 37. They call this also a phenomenon, an unexplainable event that takes place for people like us. It's this illness that lies dormant in our thinking that we can't see, feel, and touch. It's just lying there. And when it becomes present, we're drinking again and wondering how it happened. "Bill, somebody pushed a drink my way. Was I crazy?" I began to wonder. Each time it was going to be the last time. Anybody been there? Right? Now we're talking the inability to stay sober. Now we're talking about the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous taking place, because we have a solution for that. We don't treat alcoholism. We have a treatment for it. Right? And it removes this problem. Because as long as this problem is present, I'll continue to drink. I haven't dealt with alcoholism in 33 years. The insanity of the first drink hasn't returned since I've done this course of action. And I maintain it through a relationship with a power greater than myself. That's not my idea, that's the book's idea. I still have the human dilemma that they talk about in We Agnostics and through the rest of the book. The 4th step is the human condition. Right? So we shall describe some of the common manifestations, but in humans, anybody with this level of resentment, fear, and all that stuff is going to affect them in a way that makes them ill. Doesn't make them alcoholic, but for us, it keeps us shut off from the sunlight of the Spirit, and we drink again. So it's infinitely grave, this mastering resentment, outgrowing fear through a connection greater than ourselves. So when they talk about this phenomenon that parallels with our sound thinking that places us beyond human aid, it makes sense why they end that chapter by saying, once more, in case you didn't get it through the whole rest of the book, once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. His defense must come from a power greater than himself. So when this guy had the step one experience, he talks about where relapse was unthinkable. You listen to most people in AA, when they say relapse is unthinkable, you haven't done step one yet. Because if you're alcoholic of our type, relapse is very thinkable. That's why we have a daily reprieve, contingent on certain things. And I'm not one of those things that's contingent on. Because when this thing returns, I don't know it's returned. And what happened, we heard it today. People, you hear it, how many times have you heard people say, I don't know what happened, I just found myself drinking after 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And then because they don't understand alcoholism, they'll come out and say, I have a choice today. Then you still don't understand alcoholism, because the book talks about having lost the ability to choose whether we will drink or not. If you still have a choice, you're still welcome to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. But if you're an alcoholic of our type, that will do little for you. Right? That's why we read how it works. That's why we go through these things, because our fate is we have two alternatives: an alcoholic death or spiritual help. There's no door number three. And if you don't understand alcoholism, then you don't know what you're up against. Because the process is assurance against the relapse that was coming that isn't coming anymore. Because if there was anything I could have done about my last relapses, then I wouldn't need this solution. So they talk about, my sponsor did, how many people would like to know if they've done step one or not? Nobody. No, right? My sponsor says this. Think about it. He says, think about your last relapse. I said, okay. I just left the meeting. 360 meetings in 90 days. I got a 3-month chip. You're just about to pick up that drink again. He says, what would you do different? Having done step one, there was nothing I could have done different. The illness had me, I didn't have it. Because if I could have done anything different, then I wouldn't need this solution. I wouldn't be beyond human aid. I don't get a redo. Well, what do I get to do about the one that's coming is we have a solution for that. It's laid out by the first 100 men and women. That's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the message we carry here. Because when we stop carrying this message, people like me, people like you die. That's what this weekend's about, is to rejuvenate what we're about and why we do what we do. Because you know what? It's not just that person coming here looking for, it's their family, their kids. They're hoping that their dad, their mom, their sister or brother can find something here. Because I'd rather them talk at their first year cake than us talk at their eulogy. Right? And so who's responsible for this message? Not all of us, just those of us. Right? Yeah, what a miracle we have here. Right? Think about where you were not too long ago. Think about it. And what you wouldn't give to have the experience you have now. Right? How many people? Yeah. That is the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous that's still present today as it was when the doctor witnessed this thing. And who are we to deny anybody else coming here looking for it? May the grace of God be with you. The power of force continue to be a part of it.